also of reading, of doing research. So we're going to read what other people have written in order to be part of that conversation. It's part of the process, okay? So we have survey, collecting data, and one way is by surveying people. We have reading, doing research. What are your stereotypes, okay? What do economists do? What do we work with?
Graphs.
Graphs, yeah. What are you graphing? Numbers, right?
And then my stereotype is very conservative.
Very conservative, right? So we're working with numbers, we're doing empirical research, right? We're doing a lot of math, we're doing a lot of analysis of data, we're generating methods for analyzing data, right? Methods of presenting that data. So a lot of what economists do are working with numbers, working with data, figuring out how to look at that data, how to analyze it, and then how to present it to people, right? So we're going to graph things, we're going to draw things up in tables, and present it in other visual ways, right? So that's a lot of the work that we're doing, okay? So the stereotype I was looking for was really that we work with numbers, right? And that our focus is all on just looking at numbers. So I think that's where economists, what we're usually associated with in our research. But I'd argue that a lot of what economists do is writing, right? And so the work of writing in economics is to process all of this data, right? So to develop some sort of understanding of the data and the results of our data, right? And writing is a tool that we use to process that information, okay? So generally economists will publish, or at least in my work, and again, I work on these questions of human well-being, human flourishing, and I'll publish in academic journals, or some of the other work I've done before I came to UNC is I worked in the policy world. I worked at the United Nations, so I was doing a lot of policy research, a lot of writing for a policy audience, so really trying to affect change like we talked about before. And so if you look at academic journals, let's take that one, you'll see that the vast majority of articles written in economics are written, right? So even though we're maybe stereotyped and known for data analysis, the vast majority of what's presented in an academic article is narrative, is some sort of written understanding of this data, okay? So that's for an academic audience. That's economists talking to other economists. In the policy world, I'd say that writing is even more important, okay? Because for policy, so myself working as an economist in policy, I was writing for policymakers, for people who are actually going to affect that change, to make that change happen. And I was trying to inform them. So my research was, the goal of my research was to inform them so that they could take that and actually make the changes happen in the policy world. Policymakers are generally not economists. They might have some background in economics, but the vast majority of them are not economists. So in this way, you have to write, so we're presenting all of this information and data, and you have to write in such a meaningful way, right? In such a way that the policymakers can understand it and they can take it to affect change on the ground. Right, so it has to be meaningful, it has to be written in a way that they can understand. It also has to be effective, right? So you're trying to write a policy argument using all of this data, using all of these tools of economics, but you want it to be convincing, right? So the policymakers will pick it up. So I'd say in those fields, writing is even more important. And you can't lean on understanding, so economists talking only to other economists. So you might make assumptions about what they understand about the research that you're presenting. You have to really work on your style and focus on, again, your audience for who you're talking to. So the main point I'm trying to say here is that even though economics is associated so much with data work and numbers and empirical research, writing is really important. It's really important for this processing, it's really important for presentation, it's really important for affecting change if that's what you want to do on the ground through policy. So again, that processing. So I have four elements that I want to say, maybe it's actually five, for why I think writing is important in a field like economics. For one, it's a method of inquiry, right? So it helps us to understand the questions that we're asking, right? And to understand the whys of those questions, the reality around those questions, right? To really formulate the question that we want. We write about it so that we know what we're saying and what we're actually looking at. The second one is a tool for analysis, right? So we've already discussed that a little bit, or I already discussed it. So we do all this data work, right? So you get all this data, you run it through some methodologies, some tools for analysis, and you pump out these numbers. How are you going to understand what those numbers actually mean, right? How are you going to create your understanding? Through writing, right? What's actually happening? Okay, this chart, it's moving upward, it has this slope, et cetera, but what does that actually mean? And to develop that understanding using this tool of analysis that's writing, it helps you process that understanding. The third one is echoing a lot of what's been said here, but I think of it as your connection to the field, right? So your connection to your audience, right? So we write so that we can be part of this greater conversation with those who've done the research before us, those who are doing the research when we're doing the research, and then in the future, right? So people will read what you've written, and then the process will continue, right? So it's this connection to your audience, a form of communication. The fourth one we've already talked a lot about, but it's writing can affect change. So the example that I used was that policy example, right? So I write, when I was working at the UN, I was writing policy briefs that policymakers would then take with them so they can affect change in their policy dealings, okay? And the fifth one, for me, this one's especially important. It's really like a storehouse for memory, right? So you write, you process what you've written, you write a paper, you write your analysis in economics of all the data sources, all of the information about what your data is showing. You write it up so you can remember it. Right? My memory isn't the best, so I can remember it, even if I don't publish the paper, even if it doesn't become a policy brief. So I can go back, oh yeah, I did that work, I asked this question before. What did I say about that? Because I can't remember. So you can go back. And so for myself personally, it's a storehouse for memory, but also within the field, it's a storehouse for memory through publication, through being part of that conversation. Okay. Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Jason Winder and I'm on faculty in the Department of Health and Wellness. And my writing is in a broad area of biomedical research, in particular in the neurosciences. And in preparation for this conversation, I was thinking about what I value most in science writing. I'm just lump all of science together and think about science writing today for now. The things that I value most are, actually surprised me when I took inventory of this, clarity, collaboration, and creativity. And so those are the things I would like to explore. And the reason it surprised me is I was a little bit surprised. I don't think of science writing as necessarily clear. And although I know it to be collaborative, it's also very competitive. And it took me a long time, kind of late into my career, in fact just recently, that I really started to appreciate the creative aspects of science, and in particular science writing. So I'd like to talk about those three things. So science values clear and simple writing, and this is true even though science writing is often very formal and overburdened by jargon, technical jargon. I know this in a very painful way, from a kind of painful experience. A couple of years ago, I submitted a paper for publication, and the process in biomedical research for publishing your work in peer-reviewed journals is you submit your manuscript, something you've been working on for a long time. In this case, it was probably 4 or 5 years for me by the time I conceived of the hypothesis, come up with the study design, collected data, recruited people, collected data, and the results. So this is many years into it. And I viewed this particular work as my magnum opus up to this point. This was my great work, and I submitted it to a journal that I had published in before. And normally what happens is the editor will triage it out to 3 people who are peers in the field, and they will review it, and usually very critically, and that process is very painful. Well, this process was especially painful because the editor wrote back, and in a couple of days. And my immediate reaction when I saw an email from the editor of the journal was, oh my gosh, this paper was so good, they're just gonna, it got greenlit straight onto it. This has never happened to me, because I was very proud, I put a lot of work into this. And no, on the contrary, the editor wrote, this needs to be rewritten. This reads as if it was written, and I'm sort of semi-quoting here, it reads as if it was written by someone for whom English was a second language. And this was very painful to me because I speak no second language. In fact, I struggle with the English language oftentimes, especially in writing. And so this was a very painful thing. I actually was very upset. I didn't know exactly what to do. I contacted Diva Trewick, who many of you know as director of the Writing Center, although is he still director of the Writing Center?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And he sat down with me just like he would, or his staff would with any of you, and we went through the paper together, and he comforted me. He didn't think there was anything wrong with it. He actually thought it was pretty good, as I did. But I learned that I was trying to force a lot of jargon into a pretty strict word limit. I was trying to force a lot of ideas and a lot of abbreviations, and it was just ruining the way this paper read. And so it took me a while to figure this out, but that was the problem. And so I had failed to convey these ideas in a clear and simple way, and I overburdened this paper more than scientific papers are typically overburdened. So I think the point I want to make about that is there are good writers and not so good writers in science. In fact, I feel like in biomedical research and maybe science as a whole, the writing piece is viewed as secondary to the actual science, research piece. And that's unfortunate because writing is so important, and this is a skill that develops with practice, which I want to talk about a little bit more. I also think it's very important to understand that science is a very collaborative field. Dr. Mahoney mentioned this in economics, and I know it's true in other fields. In some areas within the humanities, certainly not all, but in some, oftentimes there's a single author on papers or on works. And in science, that's very rare. In science, there's typically many authors. In fact, a recent paper that mapped the genome in 20 different people's 20 different breast cancers showed that these 20 different breast cancers had entirely different genetic makeups, which is a huge surprise to science. Many felt like this set back cancer research by decades, but actually it was probably a big step forward to respect that all cancers are very different. But on this particular paper, which was published, I believe, in the Journal of the American Medical Association, there were dozens of authors. I mean, dozens, like the number 48 is sticking out. I don't know the exact number, but I think I counted, and it was in the ballpark of 48 or 50, which is kind of surprising. However, in science, there are very strict guidelines about what it means to be an author, and certain criteria have to be met to be considered an author on a scientific paper. Science builds very much on the work of others, and that takes many forms. Being aware of what's happened in the field before you, being aware of what's going on, following people from afar, and some of those people you might share ideas with via email. All the time I'm getting emails from people all around the world. I read your methods in such and such paper, can you explain more such and such, or what would you recommend? This like really beautifully collaborative effort to seek the truth, to gain answers in science. And I love the informal collaboration as much as the formal collaboration. We are co-authors on this work together. So some people you'll work with from afar, and some people you'll work with very closely within the writing process. And I think that's a very good way to be productive in science, is to have good collaborators. And that's got to be true in other fields as well. Surrounding yourself with people that will push you and help you and be critical of you in a positive way and help us grow is a great way to develop as writers and as thinkers. The last thing I want to say is that science is very creative. And I think for me this is such an important message because when I was an undergraduate, I struggled very much with a balance between science and art. I am a musician still, and I was playing a lot. I still play, but I was playing a lot when I was an undergraduate. And I also thought I wanted to be a scientist, or I felt like I had strengths in the sciences. And so I didn't know what to do. I kind of felt at that time that I needed to be one or the other, and I don't know that I had anyone telling me, look, you can be both. In fact, it just hit me within the past couple of years that of all the different creative endeavors, all the different creative fields that I've sort of participated in, I actually feel, at least for me, that science is the most creative. I still play music, but I've noticed that scientific ideas come to me the way melodies come for songs, and that is oftentimes when I'm not doing much, like driving or taking a shower, my mind is free, I'm not focusing on anything, or after I've just experienced something that's very inspiring, like reading fiction is very inspiring for my musical world, and music is very inspiring for my scientific world. I can't quite figure all of that out, but the point I want to make is that science is creative, and science thrives on creativity. We need creativity in science. And so I think, to tie this in with writing, the writing that describes science needs to be able to clearly convey that creativity and the novelty and the passion within science, because there's so much creativity, novelty, and passion in science, even though the writing is oftentimes very distant and formal, and that plural first person that Dr. Balls was mentioning. The last thing I'll say, I know I just said that, but actually second to last thing I'll say is that scientists and humanists should collaborate more, and my personal feeling is that the best scientists in the world right now are doing just that. So we're seeing these really great collaborations. My favorite scientists actually are researching how the human brain and cultures have evolved together to allow for these cultural inventions like reading and music and math and science. And from a technical standpoint, to me, and I remember I have vivid memories of this going back to my undergraduate years, writing is challenging. One of the hardest parts of writing is actually getting started. Has anyone experienced anything like this? I have writer's block, I can't do this now, I'll do this tomorrow, maybe on Monday. I would say that, that it is important to get started, just start. One of the beautiful things about writing is the editing process. So if you start early and practice often and keep going and try just not to take your pen off the paper maybe or your fingers off the keyboard, you can always go back and edit, especially if you started early enough to give you time to go back and edit. And those two things work really well together. Starting, writing, and editing go really well together. And if you start early enough, you can have the time and the energy for effective editing. And it's these rewrites. It's me sitting down and painfully taking in that input that my writing reads as if it was written by someone for whom English is a second language. So to sit down and rewrite it, it was so much better, and I was very proud of that final product. The very last thing I want to say, in response to something Dr. Jansen said very beautifully, I thought she talked about reading as listening. And I've been thinking a lot about that over the past couple of years too. Reading as engaging in this relationship with the author and the author's mind, whether they're still living or no longer living. Reading can be so inspiring. I mean, we learn a lot from reading, but it can generate so many new ideas because of this relationship. It's a very special relationship. And I know for me, I've been asking students in my classes, I'm no longer lecturing as much, but trying to read more in class and engage in this relationship with the author. I think is a really special thing.
So now is your opportunity to ask any of the panelists questions that you have about writing in general, about writing in their particular fields, about what they do, about maybe the types of writing that they are asking their students to engage in and classrooms. What else do you want to know about your writing life beyond Lane 120? Pretty big charge I just put on them, sorry.
You know, the topic of what kind of type of writing, like first person, second person, third person. I was wondering, like, for the other three departments, like, what kind of writing style do they
So, especially with regard to the pronouns, is
Yeah,
that? You know, in literary studies, so it was very conventional, and many of you maybe had high school English teachers who said, like, no first person, none at all, right? And part of that was, you know, related to what Dr. Balls was talking about with this sort of idea of objectivity, that there was this idea that the first person somehow automatically meant subjectivity, right? And I think with the trend in current literary studies where the writing is becoming increasingly acceptable to make it more personal, that's one of the biggest shifts that I notice is not only the use of first-person pronouns, first-person singular pronouns often, but also there's, depending on exactly what the topic is and how the author's doing it, there's increasing acceptability of also giving occasionally relevant personal anecdotes, right? which I think maybe 20 years ago would have been like, you just don't do that, right? And so it's changing. And a lot of it, for your careers here, a lot of it will depend on an instructor's training and what they're used to and what's conventional in their specific field. Even within the English department, different instructors will have different ideas about it because of their backgrounds, their specific subfield within English studies.